Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host, Matt Filipovitz. Matt, would you like to tell everyone that the conversation we were just having about Chappell Roan, or should I do that?
I'll say it. Chappell Roan is going to be my top artist this year. She makes bangers only. Like, straight up, there's very few albums that are, like, no skips for me. But, like, she did Pink Pony Club last night on SNL. Great. Loved it. Super graphic, ultra modern, great song. Literally, Bill, it's her moment, and we're just living in it. And
yeah,
I'm excited that we started with that, Bill, because my follow-up to that, we were about to hit record, was let's go to therapy. Because I have a lot to talk to.
I always planned, once we had our little side riff about Chappell Roan, I was like, yeah, we're going to lead off the podcast with that. And I'm just not going to tell Matt that we're doing it. But yeah, we are here, obviously, to talk about Penn State losing for the first time this season on Saturday afternoon to Ohio State, 20-13, the Nittany Lions. Jumped out to a 10-0 lead. Zion Tracy made the play of his life on Ohio State's first drive for a pick six. But from there, Nittany Lion defense held on about as well as I think it could have. A couple of things didn't go their way, and we will certainly end up talking about that. And then Penn State's offense for the second year in a row just laid an egg in a game against Ohio State, a game that Matt was there for that. I think that's the thing. I am certainly not as existential as you are about Penn State losing this football game. Mm-hmm. But whatever disappointment that I have comes from the fact that this was right there for Penn State in a way that even previous losses to Ohio State wasn't. And for reasons, some in their control, some out of their control, they weren't able to take advantage of that.
First and goal from inside, like your 6-yard line twice, no points. You don't deserve to win if that's the case. If you walk away from those snares with no points. Penn State did not deserve to win that game. But it doesn't change the fact that they had a right to win that game as much as they have had in a long time. You mentioned, you're not as existential as it about me. Bill, you and I have worked together for, I think this is like our 8th season together. So I think we've seen our fair share of losses, and it's pretty routine for me after a loss like this. It's dread for about the first 4 hours, whatever. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and then I usually sleep it off and I'm fine and I'm able to take a step back. Bill, I had a take yesterday that I said if I slept on it, I still felt the same way. I'll share it on the podcast, and I feel the same way. In my opinion, with James Franklin going now 1-10 against Ohio State in his career, and I'm tired of the stat that's like he's 1-whatever against top 5 teams. Everybody sucks against top 5 teams. Is Franklin a little bit worse? Probably, but everybody's awful against top 5 teams. But with all that being said, if Penn State does not go 11-1 and make the playoff this year, I think they should fire James Franklin. I don't think I've ever said that in the podcast before. But this is the time to figure it out. And I know figure it out is a term that you're not a big fan of, but there's no other way to describe how I'm feeling after watching Penn State choke again. Bill, you don't get a 10-point lead against Ohio State very often. To watch them bottle up, and I get it. A lot of it was bad penalties. A lot of it was just unforced errors. That pick by Igbinosun is the best interception I think I've ever seen. The fumble that was then called an incomplete pass, that was then upheld as an incomplete pass, was a bad call in my opinion. Elliott Washington, unsportsmanlike conduct, I thought was a bad opinion. All that in a vacuum, I understand why Penn State lost this game. The problem is, I can't view this game in a vacuum anymore. After watching 11 vacuums and 10 of them result in losses. Vanderbilt has as many top 5 wins this century, Bill, as Penn State does. That's kind of unacceptable for me at this point. I think James Franklin's a very good coach. I really don't think he's as bad as people say he is. But with that being said, I understand and appreciate what he's built. But I think human nature is, all right, that's great. What's next? And for Penn State, what's next has to be the playoff, Because if that's not what's next, Bill, I see the other scenario the season could go in that Penn State goes 10-2. Their only losses are to Ohio State and Minnesota. We're right back where we were in 2019, for lack of a better term. I'm just frustrated. And I don't know if I'm even, speaking coherently right now, trying to form these thoughts, but I am just abundantly frustrated because I don't think, if you would have told me after the 2016 game that they will go on to lose the next 8 straight against Ohio State, I would call you a liar. I would say something went horribly wrong. But in reality, it's just been 8 straight vacuums that have ended horribly for Penn State. And this was the one loss where I think I got the most frustrated because it felt right there for the taking. And they laid an egg. And that I just think is the most frustrating part. So the way I view the season kind of changes now. Now it's go 11-1, make the playoff, and I'll be fine. But if you don't do that with this roster, I think it's justified to make a move. I do.
I disagree for the basic point that you made in there that James Franklin is, however you cut it, a great coach.
He is.
I think that, and I don't think you just get rid of a great coach. Like, I don't think that you do that. I think that when you concede, as you have conceded many times, Matt, that Penn State is never going to win in your eyes, never going to win a national championship in your lifetime. The place that I think Penn State inherently is going to settle into, and I think the place that Penn State has settled into, is a place of being one of the best teams in that next tier that is not going to win a national championship. And it's something that Penn State has settled into very nicely. And I don't think, as we are entering a phase of college football, don't get me wrong, if the season goes completely off the rails, if Penn State loses 3 of its last 4 to end the year, I think that's a different like, I legitimately think disaster is the only way you start having these conversations. Like, if they are to lose to Washington or to Minnesota, like, I'm not going to be sitting here calling for James Franco's. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be doing that. I think as we are going into we are in this era of college football when it really is the Wild West. It really is the Wild West in how easily players can leave your team, in how transactional it is for players and coaches, but especially for players. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very good thing. It should be transactional for players because it is transactional for everyone else who has a financial stake in this. With how transactional it all is, I think the worst thing that you could do is upset the apple cart in pursuit of this extra 5%, this extra 3%, this extra last little bit that you want your program to aspire towards just for this period. Do not get me wrong. Once revenue sharing comes, once a collective bargaining agreement comes, once those kind of things come, I think it's more reasonable to aspire towards that stuff, unless you get, the example is always Georgia. Everyone always points to Georgia hiring Kirby Smart. What no one ever mentions is that Georgia put $250 million into its football program after that to make sure that Kirby Smart had everything it had. And when I listen to, we come at this from a Penn State perspective, Matt. We come at this from the perspective of Penn State fans. We come at this from the perspective of people who want Penn State to do well. And it's always humbling to me when I hear people, there was a clip of Bud Elliott from earlier today that went around that I thought was really good, really interesting. And it's a clip that echoes a lot of the opinions that I have heard and we have heard about Penn State over the years, which is that essentially James Franklin is maxing out what he could do at Penn State, and the way that Penn State takes the next step forward is not dependent on the coach. It is not dependent on the players they can currently get. It is dependent on how are you going to raise the ceiling of this program. And as long as that is the case, I frankly am very happy with where Penn State is at. Not to say that I am happy they lost to Ohio State. I promise you, more than most people I am not happy they lost to Ohio State, because I live in Columbus, Ohio, and now have to be surrounded by this for the next 364 days of my life. But what I am saying, Matt, and I will throw it back to you after this, is that I think when the perception of Penn State from everyone is that Penn State is doing everything it can right now, and this is the outcome. I know you're going to say figure it out. God bless you if you want to say that. I am happy with where Penn State is in college football's pecking order for now. And once Penn State gets to a point where it's ready to take that next step, it is institutionally ready to take that next step. It is getting in not just a couple of players, because they have a couple of players who can help them take that next step. But when they're lining up 11v11 against Ohio State, I'm not watching guys consistently get overwhelmed because the other team's guys are bigger, faster, stronger, and better. Then I'm going to be a lot more willing to have conversations, but I'm not willing to throw away what has been one of the best periods in Penn State's history, save for one or two things, because of those one or two things.
And Bill, I totally get what you're saying, and it feels and I, you know me, Bill. We worked together for a long time. I want to appreciate that.
We don't work together. We do this as a hobby. I really need to make sure everyone understands.
That is true.
We got nothing else better to do.
That is true. That is true. This is the number 6 team in the country. Like, I grew up in a Penn State family. Like, I understand what Penn State is. I understand what Penn State was when I grew up. And maybe I'm a little bit spoiled by what I think Penn State can be. I don't think James Franklin is a bad coach. And I really want to make sure I emphasize that. I hate this idea, and I will repeat it any chance I get. The idea that James Franklin is a good recruiter and a bad coach is one of the dumbest arguments ever. He has never signed a top 5 class. He has signed twice as many classes ranked outside the top 20 than he has in the top 10. Anybody who tells you Franklin is a recruiter and not a coach is a liar, and it's a lazy take. So I hate that, and I will always get that out there. And I understand that Penn State's spot in college football is as like the 7th to 14th best team in the country. And that is such a great place to live in the 12-team era. Because if you get in, you never know what's going to happen. But with that being said, Bill, you said all these things about Penn State's lack of institutional commitment to building a championship caliber football program. And you're right. That's been the case for a long time, because for 4 decades, Penn State was run by a man who refused to change, and it set them behind the 8 ball at least 12 years.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest Joe fan on earth, but I don't think that is accurate.
Okay. All right. Fair. Maybe I have a poor read on that. That's kind of where I come from.
The thing with Joe is that he was ahead of the game Joe Paterno for a long period of time was as good and as innovative and as ruthless and as anything of a football coach as you could be. And yes, by the end, there was a lot of inertia, but for a very long time, Joe was the exact kind of football coach, the exact kind of guy who could walk into a room. You know, it's the thing everyone always said about Joe. He could walk into a living room and he could sell his team to a family just as easily as he could walk into a room with a bunch of donors and get them to give money. And obviously there's that stuff, and there are the ways that college football has changed with, you know, unlimited scholarships. Joe could get whoever he wanted from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and where, like, all those sorts of things.
Right.
But like, yes, towards the end, there was a lot of inertia. The program was run by inertia and the personality that everyone remembered.
That's what I'm.
But
that's
for
what
a
I'm
very long
on,
time, yes. Okay.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. There are 2 different distinctions, but late stage Joe set the program back a long time. There's no denying it. We can. I think we can agree on that, Bill. But you mentioned that thing about institutional support, and I talked about this a lot today. Lack of institutional support for Penn State explains to me why they went 3-8 in an 11-year period against Ohio State. Going 1-10 tells me that when the one consistent is the head coach, then maybe he's not the guy for this job. Again, I don't think Penn State is capable of winning a national title in my lifetime. I never expect them to. For me, a dream season is an undefeated regular season, and whatever happens afterwards, I don't care. I truly believe that. And who knows? Maybe that'll change my mind when they make the playoff this year, and I'll go insane because I have that right to change it. But at some point, Bill, I'm just wondering, Tennessee doesn't have the same resources or talent pool as Alabama. They beat them twice in 3 years. Vandy beat Alabama and beat Auburn. How did they do it? Minnesota beat USC this year. Minnesota beat Penn State a couple years back. How did they do it? Teams for lack of a better term, figure it out all the time. And to watch Penn State, who really only has one or two teams on the roster any given year to figure it out against, be unable to do it just kind of drives me insane. Like, I get it. Penn State is never going to be Ohio State. That is never what Penn State is going to be able to be. But to say Penn State is incapable of going 3-8, 4-7 against Ohio State in an 11-year period, I think is very reasonable. I don't think it's insane to say that they can't do that. So to watch it be 1-10, when I'm watching the roster be built by a good recruiter, again, better coach than recruiter, into what it is, to watch them lay an egg 2 years in a row in the biggest game of the year, just has me questioning if that's the guy who's going to be able to take Penn State that 3% extra that it has to go. And maybe that 3% extra can only be done through the institutional support. I don't believe that, because I think Penn State had Ohio State realistically in their grasp and they just happened to let it slide out. And I get it. It sucks. And in a vacuum, I understand why it happened. But again, it's 8 straight years. It's 10 out of the last 11. I think they needed this one. I really do. And again, they could go 11-1, host a playoff game, and everyone's going to be super happy. It's the best season of my lifetime, still on the table. But the best win in that season is going to be 8-win Minnesota. Like, and I'm not saying there's no value in beating who you're going to beat, but that was a chance for Penn State to punch above their weight class. Those chances don't come very often, and it feels like every time they come, the team just can't answer the bell for some reason. And that's what has me most frustrated.
And my thing is, I don't think you throw everything away because of this. Like, I don't. And that is essentially what is being called for here, is to throw everything away and throw things away in pursuit of something that you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily guaranteed. I think that's the big part of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
There is no guarantee that if Penn State moves on from James Franklin, which I want to stress, they're not going to do. Penn State is not moving on. They could lose to Minnesota. They could be a 10-win team, and they are not firing James Franklin.
No,
financially, it makes absolutely zero sense.
No, I know that.
Maybe they encourage him to look at the Florida job a little bit harder than normal, but
or
they're not firing.
USC
James Franklin is, James Franklin is going to be Penn State's coach in 2025. This is a very, at the end of the day, it's silly that both of us are willing to entertain this conversation. But I don't think Penn State should throw away what it has in pursuit of what it does not have, when, there's a minuscule chance. Like, I don't care as much about losing 8 in a row to Ohio State as you do, in large part because I think if they beat Ohio State in 2018, I think people are now then complaining about losing 6 in a row to Ohio State. If they beat Ohio State in 2021, I think they're then complaining about losing 3 in a row to Ohio State. I just kind of reject the framing of, if they had won one more game, if they had won 2 more games in this stretch, people would not be up in arms over what has happened over the years. But I don't think, with how risky it is to move on from your coach right now in college football, and when Penn State has, as you concede, a very good coach, a very good recruiter, a guy who sends people to the NFL pretty consistently, a guy who is very good at developing 3- and 4-star talent into NFL caliber
100%.
players. Like, James Franklin has done everything you want a football coach to do other than beat Ohio State over the last 8 years. And I don't think that is necessarily worth getting rid of or entertaining the idea of getting rid of James Franklin, in part because, to now get into this game a little bit, Matt.
Yeah.
The thing that I find frustrating here is I think that this game, my big theory of this football game, when Ohio State and Penn State lined up 11 men versus 11 men on each side of the football, almost to a man, Ohio State had the better guy. Ohio State had the more talented guy. There are some areas where this wasn't necessarily the case. Left tackle, their left tackle against Abdul Carter is a really good example of
Abdul
this.
had such a good game. Oh my God.
Yeah. Penn State's secondary played a great, like that. There were areas where this wasn't necessarily the case, but for the most part, even with our guy, Tyler Warren, I thought Caleb Downs just had a better football game than he did. to a man, Ohio State was the better football team. And yet, Matt, my general theory of this game, to get into talking about this game, is it came down to 10 50-50 plays. 10 plays that could have swung the game in either direction in a game that Penn State lost by 7 points. And 8 of them went Ohio State's way. They were Zion Tracy's pick 6. There was that awful unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, awful in that they called it, and awful in that Elliot Washington gave them an opportunity to call it. I do not think they should have called it. Elliot Washington should not have put himself into that situation.
Agreed on both.
That's
a great call to call out both of those things, Bill. That's discipline. Also, it's soft by the refs, but I get why they called it. Objectively, I kind of do.
Two on the exact same drive. 1, 4th and 1. Abdul Carter doesn't sack Will Howard. Ohio State calls a terrible play. Abdul Carter blows it up. He gets to Will Howard. Penn State has the ball in Ohio State's 40. Instead, they convert that play and march down the field a little bit. A little bit later on that drive, Will Howard fumbling. This is the other play that went in Penn State's direction. But that cost Penn State 50 yards of field position, Abdul Carter not getting to Will Howard there. There was the Trey Wallace pick, which, that play is, if I'm pointing to one thing that actually gets me pissed off, that was the play that got me pissed off. Because Trey Wallace had a touchdown in his hands. Obviously, Davison Igbinosun was doing a lot of grabbing on him and got completely away with a lot of and all game they got away with a lot of grabbing. Trey Wallace has to pull that ball in. He does that. Penn State gets to, at least 17, possibly 20 points in this football game. It just completely changes the way that this game happens.
On that point, Bill, on that point, can I say something about that specific play?
Sure.
I think that was a bad play call to run the fade there. I get that you want to get the quick score, but people were complaining about how James Franklin handled timeouts there. I thought he handled that brilliantly. I thought
he handled the entire end of the first half extremely well.
Yeah, I think it's just a lazy take from people who want their priors confirmed that Franklin didn't handle it well. People were like, oh my God, you lost, 45 seconds. It's like, all right, you're in control. You're moving the football. You don't want to give the ball back. What are you talking about? Watch the game. I thought it was a mistake not to run a run play with Katron Allen there when you had one timeout in your back pocket. I thought that was a pretty bad call to run the fade.
I thought doing that taking one shot into the end zone with 11 seconds left or whatever it was, or I think it would have been 13 seconds left. Take one shot into the end zone on about as low percentage of a play for there to be an interception as possible. And if there are 100 outcomes on that play, 75 of them are an incompletion, or, we'll say 60 of them are an incompletion. 39 of them are a touchdown, and 1 of them is an interception. And they got the 1 in 100 outcome in out. So that's another one of the coin flip plays. The fumble that wasn't a fumble, which I still have no goddamn clue what happened there. I think, maybe I was wrong. I was watching at a bar, so I'm not 100% sure. I think they called it a fumble originally and then came together and talked about it and called it an incomplete pass and then looked at it. I think that's what happened.
They they called it on the field as a fumble originally. They came together and said, no, that's an incompletion, which, whatever, who cares? And then they had to confirm it with video replay that it was. So the fact that they overturned the call on the field kind of meant that you needed inconclusive video evidence. I don't think that video was inconclusive. I personally think that if it was ruled a fumble on the field on the second time, that would have stood as well. I think whatever the call on the field was going to stand. I thought that was a absolute ref. And again, I don't want to blame the refs. Penn State did not lose this game because of the refs. And I want to make sure that,
to an extent, I will agree.
I mean, everybody makes an impact, but twice from the 5.
When we get to talking about the offense,
right? Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'll pass it back to you, Bill, for your other.
And then obviously the four plays of the goal line where Andy Kotelnicki, we've been giving him his flowers all season. He was terrible there. He was terrible.
Awful.
To call 3 straight run plays and then put yourself in a situation where either A, punch it in from 1 yard out while running the football, or throw the football into the end zone. And almost certainly by that point, everyone knew you were throwing the ball into the end zone. That's not okay. That, I didn't think Andy Kotelnicki had an especially great game. That in particular, you have to call a pass play on 2nd or 3rd down. And to keep Vega Ioane split out wide on the 4th down play call and motion him into pass block instead of lining him up at guard and having your best guys in there, instead of maybe use him to pick someone to get Tyler Warren open, whatever it is, it was just bad process all the way around. So, Matt, I point to those 10 plays as the 50-50 plays in the game, the plays that you flip a coin and you hope that you get 6 of the 10. And if you get 6 of the 10, you're going to have a good shot at winning. Ohio State got 8 of the 10 coin flips in this game. And even then, Penn State lost this game by 1 touchdown.
Yeah, and I'm glad we can just kind of dive into the offense here. It was unacceptable. You hired this guy to make the big plays in these kind of games. Bill, you know when the last time, I want to say this is accurate, the last time Penn State was held without an offensive touchdown?
It's been a very long time. I saw it on
2014 against Northwestern.
Yeah.
A decade.
Yep.
That's the guy you hired, and that's what he gives you. I'm a big Andy Kotelnicki fan. I don't believe you should judge somebody based upon their worst day. That was his worst day. And to have it in that game is frankly unacceptable. I cannot believe that is the result we had. I thought Allard did about as well as he could have done in this game. His receivers didn't do him any favors. This program needs to figure out a way to bring in a dog at wide receiver. Trey Wallace is a great player. Liam Clifford is a good player. Julian Fleming is a good player. Amari Evans is a good player. You need an elite wide receiver for this offense to go. Andy Kotelnicki can cover up a lot of problems, but when he is the problem, which he was on Saturday, you are not going to be competitive. Again, I think the fade to Trey Wallace was a bad call. I understand why you called it. It's low percentage. That pick does not happen. You mentioned it, Bill, 99 times out of 100. It doesn't. You know what might work, though? A run up the gut with Katron Allen when you have the Ohio State defense on its heels, when you have one timeout in your back pocket because you handled that 2-minute scenario brilliantly. That was Bush League. I cannot believe they came out of that with no points. And then it's just softness up front. I'll call them out. Not getting Katron in on those 3 attempts is soft. I get it. Ohio State has NFL players up front. Find a way. That's what you train all year for. And I get it. That sucks. That's the outcome of this game. But those 2 specific plays meant Penn State did not deserve to win the game. Like I again, Bill, I know you're more frustrated by the Trey Wallace part of that. I just think that of the fade at the end of the first half, I think you could have just given a big middle. Franklin could have given a huge middle finger to everybody who talks shit about his relatively poor clock management. If he marched down the field, he scored a touchdown to end the half and left Ohio State with no time. That would have been a masterclass, but it wasn't. There's a lot of ifs in this series, and I'm kind of tired of the ifs. And this game just kept on having ifs. And there's a lot of swing plays. If Penn State hits them, they probably win. But again, there's ifs all throughout college football and all throughout the history of Penn State football. And just, again, not enough ifs went in Penn State's direction. And that just sucks.
It does. And as a result, we're sitting here talking about the number 6 team of the country that is sitting at 7-1 and is in really good position for a playoff game. Really terrible stuff. Let's do the we'll get to what went wrong for Penn State on both sides of the football in a sec. But first, we'll pay some bills by talking about our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Home Field. I wore Home Field stuff during the game. I wore my blue Penn State jacket, one of my favorite things in my collection. I don't even know how much stuff I have from Home Field Apparel right now. It is, even if they weren't sponsoring the podcast, they would be one of my favorite apparel brands out there. Everything that they have is so cool. They work so hard to come up with really unique designs to make you feel connected to whatever school you love or whatever school might interest you. If you are a Penn State fan, they have tons of Penn State gear. If you are not a Penn State fan, wherever you went to school, Home Field Apparel almost certainly has stuff for your school in their collection. And I'm going to recommend that you go out and get something from Home Field Apparel, whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's a crew neck, whether it's a hoodie, whether it's a jacket, whatever it might be. And if you've never purchased anything from Home Field Apparel before, use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. Again, use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. Thank you as always to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the podcast. Matt, let's get back to talking about this game. And
Real
we'll go
quick,
with
Bill,
what
on
went
the
wrong.
home
Go
field
ahead.
point, I met a guy
Go ahead.
in the bathroom at the bar I was at, an Illinois grad. I forget his name, and he had the Illinois home field apparel bomber jacket.
Very good.
And we kind of chatted about Luke Altmaier for a little bit while waiting in line for the stall. So shout out to that guy.
Very nice. Let's get back to talking about the game, and let's talk about what went wrong for Penn State on both sides of the football.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Penn State on defense first, just because I think that'll be a slightly shorter conversation.
Mhm.
And what I basically think went wrong is that Ohio State did a better job running the football than I think anyone anticipated they would have going into this.
Mhm.
Quinshon Judkins at 6.8 yards per carry, Travion Henderson at 5.4 yards per carry. I really think, Matt, that Penn State's defense played well. The pick six was an all-time, God damn it, I wish this was a night game moment, because it, like, you could just tell through the TV the stadium wasn't as up for that as it would have been.
Mhm.
But I really think any issue that the defense had in this game came down to the fact that when Ohio State ran it with their two top backs, things generally went pretty well for them. But otherwise, like, I don't put too terribly much on the defense in this one.
You shut down Jeremiah Smith. You got a defensive score against Ohio State. Ohio State read the scouting report, and they didn't run the football up the gut where Penn State's strongest. They kept on running to the outside. That pitch play to Quinshon Judkins on Ohio State's, I want to say their first touchdown drive, was such a good play call. Like, Tony Rojas is not a great tackler right now, and they kind of figured that out, and they kind of went after him, which sucks because I do think he's a little.
I think the other thing they did was they went in Amin Vanover just because, like, they knew he hadn't. I think there were 2 or 3 scenarios where they did that, where it was whether
They
it was
put
a
Amin
little
in
toss
conflict.
play or whether it was a speed option.
Mhm.
They understood the fact that Amin knew Amin's entire thing is he's going to go after the quarterback, and they just took advantage of that.
Yep, and they did a good job of that. That's good. That's a good job reading the scouting report. Tom Allen's defense is not at fault for this. You held Ohio State to, what was it, Bill? 2 offensive touchdowns. The other 2 were field goal. Yeah, 2 field goals.
Yeah, two offensive touchdowns. And one thing that I think is kind of go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, all you.
I mean, what more do you want from the guy? Like, I get it. Tom Allen, I'm guilty of this too. Like, the bend don't break thing is frustrating after watching what Manny did, and it's taking me time to adjust to how he plays defense. He held an Ohio State offense with a $20 million roster to 2 touchdowns and added a touchdown for his defense on his own. He gets his flowers from me. Tom Allen is not the reason Penn State lost this game.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that the way that they scored their 2 touchdowns, they didn't necessarily they did it in such a way that basically had Penn State confused.
Mm-hmm.
Both times they shifted their formation from one formation to another, and in doing that, Penn State's defense had to really quickly identify all of its matchups, had to identify who had who, and they got put on their heels a little bit. First time, the touchdown to, I believe, Emeka Egbuka, they just run a leak right across the field. They knew how to. They cleared everything out and just gave Egbuka a lane to run into while Penn State was still trying to figure out who was supposed to be on him.
You could have driven a dump truck with how open he was. Mm-hmm. Like, you could have fit that in that much space he had to operate in. It was crazy.
Yeah. Second time, they shift their formation. They do a little play action on, like, a pitch out of shotgun, and then whoever was supposed to be with Brandon Inniss gets picked, and he's able to walk into the end zone. It was 2 moments where Ohio State was able to get the better of Penn State, but there were 2 moments that Ohio State had to generate the opportunity to get the better of Penn State. When they were just playing man on man, again, I think 2A man Penn State was just not on Ohio State's level in terms of physicality, in terms of speed, in terms of athleticism, in terms of just pure talent, other than Abdul Carter, again, having Donovan Jackson in hell for basically the entire game. But when they were just lining up and doing their thing, Penn State's defense held up pretty well, even considering, there were opportunities for Ohio State to really blow this game open, a couple of missed touchdowns. here and there. There was the Will Howard fumble, which again came on a drive where Abdul Carter had a chance to end the drive right then and there, just didn't take advantage of it. There were ways that Ohio State could have made this 27, 34, whatever that might be. But whenever Penn State's defense got called upon to do something to take advantage, do something to keep their team in this game, it wasn't like last year's game where it felt like I was watching a defense go up against an offense that it was as good as and was able to take it to that, with obviously one exception in Marvin Harrison Jr., and just take it to that group. But they were able to hold on, and they were able to fight, and they were able to survive, and they were able to hold Jeremiah Smith to 4 receptions for 55 yards and Emeka Egbuka to 3 catches for 31 yards. They did what they needed to do. The issue was on the other side of the football, where, Matt, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I am complaining. So will you please afford me a little bit of grace here?
Yeah. It wasn't good enough. Again,
it wasn't good enough. And what I think happened, the way, we'll talk about the running game in a second, the way that this game got officiated, the way that Ohio State's defensive backs were given free rein to basically be as grabby and as handsy and as physical as they wanted to be, played into Ohio State's favor in a big way.
Yeah.
I am not saying that as like the refs needed to bail Penn State out, or Penn State didn't get enough help from the refs. Certainly a flag here or there in moments where they could have called a flag would have been nice. But with how physical their defensive backs were allowed to be, it to me seemed like it took every Penn State pass catcher essentially out of the game, with the exception being Nick Singleton, because they were able to dump the ball off to him. Trey Wallace, he had a couple of drops that, obviously one for the interception, but then another one right over the middle of the field. It should have been a nice pitch and catch, just wasn't able to bring it in.
On a second down, that would have moved the sticks. It would have been like a 20, maybe 20, 17, 20-yard gain, somewhere in that realm.
It would have been a really big game, and it would have been something that the offense really needed out of him. Amari Evans was a passenger on the day. Julian Fleming caught one ball, which, more power to Julian Fleming. That's about what you expect out of him. Liam Clifford didn't catch any footballs. There were a number of times where the physicality of Ohio State's defensive backs meant that Penn State's receivers just ran into each other and Drew didn't have anywhere to throw the football. I thought that Drew had an okay game, all things considered. I thought he ran the ball well. I loved how good he was at realizing there was nothing there and taking off and taking what the defense was giving him, which is just, he ran it 10 times, he got sacked twice, so he ran it 8 times, which was, I'm just going to run forward and fall forward. I loved how he did that. But Penn State was playing offense with one hand tied behind its back, whether that's because of personnel, whether that's because of the officials, whether that's because of how Andy Kotelnicki approached this game, whatever it might be. And we saw what happened as a result.
Yeah. Again, I hear everything you're saying, and it was poorly officiated. Again, the reason Penn State lost this game is 2 drives inside like the 6-yard line and no points. It's going to come back to those 2 specific moments for me. The Penn State offensive line, I think, did a really good job keeping Aller upright. The 2 sacks were, I think, on plays that defensive holding should have been called, at least on one of them. So, take that for what it's worth.
And also on those plays, one of them was just a really good blitz where Sal Wormley had to block two guys who delayed blitz, and he was just up Schitt's Creek immediately.
Yeah.
And then right after that, it was 3rd and forever. Drew had to drop back. He had to find something down the field, and nothing down the field ended up showing up.
Yeah, the offensive line wasn't the problem in that regard. It was on that goal to go situation. Yeah, like Andy Kotelnicki's whole thing is that you're going to have the Blizzard offense. Like, you need to add the sprinkles to it. You need to add the M&Ms to it, not a sponsor. You need to add that kind of stuff to it to figure out a way to get in the end zone a single time. One offensive touchdown for this team changes everything. And the fact that once again, for the second year in a row, Penn State is unable to do it is just wildly disappointing. And again, not to go big picture again, but it's frankly unacceptable with the talent of this specific roster. I get it. Ohio State is way more talented. Teams score touchdowns against more talented teams all the time. Teams beat those teams all the time. We see it every week in college football. A team beat a team they shouldn't. The inability to do it once again, led by the offense once again, is just maddening. And everybody in that room needs to be better. And again, not to go big picture, but everything is still in front of them in the new college football, and 11-1 would be the best season of my lifetime. And I feel like I'm going doomer mode on the number 6 team in the country right now. But
it's because you are going doomer mode on the number 6 team in the country.
Right, and I get it, and I am, and I'm super frustrated by 8 straight losses, like, and no offensive touchdowns. Like I feel like a lot of fans share that sentiment, and both sides of this are totally justified in their belief. And I just feel like I'm on the fence right now over like how to even think about the future of Penn State football. But in this game specifically, since we're here, the offense's lack of creativity, once Tyler Warren finally got involved, really good things happened. Jim Knowles did a good job scheming Tyler Warren out of the equation. Andy Kotelnicki came back with 2 great counters. When they got him in one-on-one, he made a play on the football. And then when he ran for like 35 yards, that's the chess match part. That's the part that was missing for 98% of the afternoon. And to watch them just flounder and let the defense down again is just so wildly disappointing. And I feel bad for the people in that room who stepped up and were able to play some good games. I thought Drew Shelton played a really good game. I thought Vega did a good job when he was in there pass blocking for a lot of it. I thought Aller did a really good job managing this game. I thought Fleming run blocked overall pretty well when the opportunities came for Drew to run. Like Fleming did a very good job making sure he can get a couple extra yards. But as a whole, the offense gets an F. Offense gets an F for me. It wasn't good enough. And to have an F performance and only lose by a touchdown is a good spot to be in. But again, even like a C- probably wins you the game. And the guy you hired, to be the guy to get you over that hump couldn't give you a C-. That just kind of sucks.
Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to the fact that they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't consistently run the ball with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Allen, 12 carries for 27 yards, 2.3 yards per carry. I don't have it in front of me right now what it would look like if you took those 3 carries in the goal line out. But Nick Singleton, 6 carries for 15 yards, 2.5 yards per carry, along with 4. Like Penn State's offensive line, I don't think run blocked particularly well, namely in the middle. I thought Tyleik Williams in particular just ate up the middle of Penn State's offensive line. But even when there's opportunities to make a guy miss and make something happen, it's the same issue that plagued Katron Allen and Nick Singleton last year. They're not good at making guys miss for whatever reason, or haven't been good at making guys miss for whatever reason, and turning a game that is going to be 3 yards into a game that is 7 or 8 yards. I don't know what that problem is. I don't think playing Bo Pribula more would have helped. He threw 1 pass for 4 yards. He carried the ball 1 time for 0 yards. And when he was in the game, Ohio State was just not respecting his ability to throw the football in the slightest, which is what you should do when Penn State brings Bo Pribula in. You should not respect his ability to throw the football until he shows you that he can consistently enough make you respect his ability to throw the football. So the little wrinkle that is designed to take something out of your run, to add a little something to your running game, that went away. Tyler Warren, their best runner on the day, 3 carries for 47 yards, 33 of them came on 1. Even if you take that 33-yard gain out, he had 2 carries for 14 yards, 7 yards a carry. I'm not saying you should have your tight end run the football more, but like maybe in this game, you should have had your tight end run the football more. Drew Aller was their most creative runner in being able to just make stuff happen. 10 carries for 31 yards, again, with 2 sacks factored into that. And so when you can't run the football at all, and what we saw out of Ohio State, they could run the football pretty well. They weren't ripping off 30, 40, 50, 60-yard runs, but they were pretty consistently doing a nice job in their running game. And Andy Kotelnicki is an offensive coordinator who wants to build his offense around the ability to run the ball and then doing stuff off of that.
Mhm.
They couldn't do anything off of their running game because they did not have a running game. In the passing game, I don't think Andy Kotelnicki did a good job scheming up easy throw. And it's very hard to have easy throws against Ohio State's defense. One thing that we've done a bad job in this podcast so far of doing is giving Ohio State its flowers for being an excellent football team. That, especially on the defensive side of the football, defensively, they're the number one team in the country by SP+. They are an unbelievably good defensive unit.
They're every part of that 20 million. 100%.
Yeah. Yes. Best defense in the country, deservedly so viewed as the best defense in the country. The gap between them and Texas's defense, Texas is the number 2 defense, is the same as the gap between Texas and the number 6 defense in the country. They are box office on that side of the football. But Andy Kotelnicki still didn't do, I don't think, an especially good job of getting really creative, of getting, there was a moment or two where he was able to scheme open an easy throw to Nick Singleton or to to Tyler Warren to get them, just to have Drew see someone catch the football for him. And it reflected in just about everything. Very rarely did the offense do things that worked. And when things did work for the offense, that big gain by Tyler Warren, where he ran the ball for 30 plus yards, the time that Drew just threw the ball, said, screw it, Tyler's down there somewhere. And Tyler Warren was able to get a pretty big catch just right through Lathan Ransom. The big gain down the sideline to Trey Wallace right before the interception. There was always a bad thing coming on the other side of these things. They were never able to take advantage of the good things that they were able to do. And it seemed, I don't know if it was a lack of confidence, if it was being that knocked out of their game by the officials and how Ohio State secondary was playing, whatever it was an absolute chore to watch from a unit that I know is capable of better. And I think that's what sucks. Like, I know Andy Kotelnicki is a better offensive coordinator than that. Like, I didn't think Mike Yurcich was a better offensive coordinator than what we saw last year. Like, I thought Mike Yurcich sucked by that point. But I think Andy Kotelnicki is a better offensive coordinator than what he showed on Saturday. I think that most of Penn State's players are better than what they showed on Saturday. And for them to end up with 270 yards of total offense and 6 points all off of field goals, that's a punch in the gut for this unit.
Yeah, and again, the through line is that this keeps happening, and I get in the vacuum how it happened, but at some point, like this,
I'd push back against that. I'd push back.
I know, and Bill, I think you and I know
it's happened twice.
I know that we fundamentally disagree on like how to view this, and I totally see your point.
It's because the last time they played Ohio State in Happy Valley, they got most of what they needed out of their offense. The last time they played Ohio State in Happy Valley, they got 482 yards of total offense. And was it 31 points? Let me see if there was a defensive score there. Nope, just straight up 31. 31 points, 482 yards of total offense. You're saying this about these last 2 years. That's why that is more than anywhere where I'm going to just say you are absolutely wrong to say this keeps happening.
Maybe I'm wording it poorly then, because I
would say you're wording.
I think I'm wording it poorly then. Like the rug keeps getting pulled out. It's happened the last 2 years. Penn State has gotten into the same kind of game Ohio State wants to play. That 2022 game, Penn State or Ohio State wanted that to be a shootout by nature of what that Ohio State defense was at the time. And like that was a Penn State offense that was putting up a lot of points. They got in a shootout. They couldn't figure it out. Last year, defensive slugfest. They go punch, counter punch. One team is Marvin Harrison Jr. The other team goes 1 of 15 on third down. This year, they go punch, counter punch. Penn State is a 2-score lead at home against a Ohio State team led by a quarterback who's not going to go in the first round, and they get the rug pulled out. That's the thing that keeps happening, is that every time they get in the kind of fight that Ohio State wants to dictate, and I get that's what the more talented team gets to do, but you have to imagine at one point, they're going to just even stumble their way into a win in that scenario. And this was the one I think they had the best shot. And again, the defense did its part. There's just those two specific plays, the pick when it should have been a run, and the third down call of running a run again there. I think they should have thrown on third down. And then if you don't get it, run it on fourth down up the gut. If you don't get it, you don't deserve to win. I can live with that. But the lack of creativity is the thing that kills me in this specific game.
Yeah, I that part is reasonable. And I think that one thing that has not been said on this podcast, I haven't seen it said on nearly enough, said or written or anything, nearly enough as it has to be. Penn State's players weren't good enough.
They weren't.
Like, everyone looks at James Franklin. I understand looking at James Franklin and being upset over, the cumulative of it. I generally don't agree with that. I generally don't view sport like that, but I understand that. What I don't understand is how much slack the players are being given. How little blame is being put on, a guy like Trey Wallace, who I like. I'm a big Trey Wallace fan. Trey Wallace dropped a touchdown into a man's arms for an interception in a game that his team lost by 7 points. That is not good enough. The blocking, the willingness to lower your shoulder, Katron Allen, and just go through a dude on that goal line stand, at any point in that goal line stand, the way the offensive line blocked these various things, they were not good enough. And part of why I'm not as pissed off at James Franklin as most Penn State fans are, I don't think, is because I watched that game and watched players who had bad days and got manhandled and were not physically good enough. And when you're I am always going to default to players. I am always going to default to players have to get the job done at the end of the day. And Penn State's players, whether they are guys I'm really high on, like Trey Wallace, like Drew Aller, like Nick Singleton, like Tyler Warren even, or whether they're guys who I'm not as high on, or guys who I think can stand to be better and have to be better, they uniformly did not get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
They uniformly did not execute. Andy Kotelnicki wasn't up there calling the don't score a touchdown play. Andy Kotelnicki was up there trying to call plays to win the game. He didn't always do a necessarily very good job of it, but he's doing the stuff that he thought would have helped Penn State win the football game. And we could agree or disagree or whatever on whether the stuff he was doing was going to result in Penn State winning the football game. But I saw how his players executed that stuff, and they did not do well enough. And Matt, as we look at this team going forward, James Franklin is going to have to, James Franklin's going to have to rally the troops. I think having the whiteout this weekend, even if it's on fucking Peacock, oh, Jesus Christ.
Damn, Bill. I was really thinking we were going to make it the whole episode. I wouldn't have to put the explicit warning on this.
Yeah, put the explicit warning. What a fucking disgrace that they put the Ohio State game at noon because they were afraid of a World Series game and they wanted to sell more political ads, and then put the whiteout behind a paywall. What a goddamn disgrace.
Pat Kraft better be yelling at some people.
Pat Kraft better be absolutely furious about this stuff. But Penn State whiteout this week, I think this is really a really good time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think Washington is a really nice football team. They've had some pretty serious troubles going on the road this year that especially when they have to travel west to east, that I think the game state is going to bode pretty well for Penn State.
Agreed.
I think that's going to be a good opportunity for them to kind of get their minds right. Even though a thing that I learned, Washington has the best passing defense in the country. So better hope Nick Singleton shows up
Bill,
this week.
Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
They played Michigan and Rutgers.
I know.
We got to factor that in there too. We got
I'm
to
aware.
factor that in.
But I say that all that to say this, like Penn State's players need to come out pissed off next week.
Mhm.
Like James Franklin, I am sure James is going to be pounding the table. He's going to be pushing his guys. He's going to be challenging. He's going to do everything that you want a coach. Like I know no one wants to give James Franklin the benefit of the doubt. I will bet James Franklin is doing everything you want a coach to do after this. Having the whiteout is going to, I think, get them a bit of a kick in the ass heading into this end stretch of their schedule. But it's still all in front of Penn State, but they have to take it. And after this Ohio State game, and I think they will, like, I want to be clear. I think Penn State's going to end up winning out. But after this Ohio State game, there were a lot of players, Kobe King and Abdul Carter were the two that I saw saying, we want to play these guys again and we know we will beat them again. I need to see them go out against Washington this week, go out against Purdue the week after, go out against Minnesota the week after that. And I'm not worried about them going out and doing it against Maryland. They're going to, pile drive Maryland and straight to hell. I need to see them do all of that stuff and prove to not me, not other Penn State fans, prove to themselves that they are good enough to win a game against Ohio State should that opportunity present itself. Like, I'm not worried about wins and losses, Matt, because I think they're going to win the rest of their games, potentially win the rest of their games pretty comfortably. I want to see Penn State football, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, take the fact that they got humbled on Saturday and use it as fuel for the rest of the year.
That's another thing, though. I don't think I've really had a chance to really think about all that often. People who listen to this podcast a long time know my dad was a longtime high school basketball coach. And I remember he would come home sometimes and they would win like a good bit of games. Not to toot his horn for him. He listens to this podcast. Shout out to my dad. But he would say, we need to take a loss. We need to take a loss here. They need a kick in the ass. And I don't know how you apply that because I never really had to think about that in a college football sense because one loss kind of ended your season a lot of the time. That's not the case anymore. I do wonder what that's going to look like after Penn State takes the loss, gets pissed off, and then has to come out and rally the troops. I'll stand by what is at the top of the podcast. It's win out, or I'm going to be banging the Fire Franklin drum. I'm not there yet, but win out. Beat Minnesota on the road. That's the one that scares me the most because Minnesota's playing some really good football right now. But again, you have more talent. And I can't say that, I think teams with less talent can win. And I think that Minnesota's done it to Penn State before. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But I'm excited to see what they come out playing like because I want them to come out playing pissed. I want them to come out to the hundreds of thousands of people on Peacock who will be watching and show that that's a team that can go out there and realistically win a playoff game should they get the opportunity to get into the dance. So I have a lot of takes for the preview podcast, specifically around the idea of red shirts are secured for a couple of guys. So reinforcements are on the way, specifically at running back with Corey Smith now securing his red shirt. That's like a dynamic I want to flesh out more on the preview pod this week. But yeah, Bill, like it sucks. It's 8 straight. Bury it, and I want to get another shot at them. Would I pick Penn State to win again? No. Like at this point, I will believe Penn State can beat Ohio State. James Franklin can beat Ohio State when he does it. I'm not buying that stock anymore, but they have a chance for me to at least be interested in that scenario once again.
Yeah. Let's hand out game balls for this game before we wrap things up. Matt, who gets your offensive game ball? Who gets your defensive game ball?
Offensive game ball, Drew Shelton. I did not hear JT Tuimoloau's name at all. Jack Sawyer as well. That's good. Drew Shelton, you don't notice him, and that's humongous praise. So Drew Shelton on offense. Defensively, I want to give it to Zion Tracy, but Abdul Carter was a game wrecker. That's a first-round pick. That is a special player. So give it to 2 members of the 2022 class, Drew Shelton on offense and Abdul Carter on defense.
Yeah, offense, I'll give it to Tyler Warren. I don't really think there's one guy who necessarily should get it, but I also thought Penn State really could have stood to get Warren the ball more and find ways to get him involved more. And obviously Caleb Downs did a great job taking him out of the game. But, when he was given opportunities to do things, he was able to take advantage of it. So I'll say Tyler Warren. And then, yeah, I'm going to go with Abdul Carter. I mean, he was the best player on the field for either team. I think that I think that he's the reason why if Penn State plays Ohio State again, I'm going to feel pretty good about their chances, because he's a guy who has gotten better and better as the season has gone along. And I think that by the time Penn State would meet Ohio State again, I don't know how good he would be at that point. Because, like, again, he just keeps getting better and better. He's at 6 sacks on the season right now, half of a sack off of his career high, with games against sacrificial lambs in Purdue and Maryland coming up. So I continue to be more and more impressed by him. He still gets a little bit too jumpy when it, before the ball
gave
gets
up a third
snapped,
down on that one.
Yeah, which, was really unfortunate. But for the most part, like, I'm not going to sit here and complain about Abdul too much. I thought he did just about everything Penn State needed him to do. Yeah, Matt, any final thoughts before I send the people to their into their week? Or
no. Thank you for letting me kind of get on a box here, Bill. I know you and I disagree on this, but like, I think you and I both are in the same spot, and that we're both really frustrated by where this goes. I think you and I are both appreciative for the health of where Penn State football is at. And I think that you and I both feel like they have a damn good shot to host a playoff game, which would be an unbelievably cool way to enter this 12-team playoff era, and going 11-1 would be the best season of my lifetime. And I really hope that they can pull it off.
Matt, can I get you to just admit one thing before we go off?
Yeah, hit me.
I was right about playoff expansion being a good thing.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I'll admit that.
Good.
Yeah, and when I recorded that, I'm like, my opinion's going to change because it's going to be cool. And like, yeah, change is scary. Change is 100% scary.
No, it's not. It's cool.
Change is cool. It is. No,
we're right now. It's cool.
It is cool. It is. No, you're right. Yeah, 100% you're right. The expanded playoff is good for college football. Yeah, you were right.
I'm very glad that we're going to be, and this is not just a Penn State thing. I'm very glad we're going into this final month of the season where Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Notre Dame, and Boise State and SMU all have one loss. And I'm not sitting here worrying or wondering when the shoe is going to drop and they are going to be punished to the extent that they're supposed to be punished. Like, the fact that games are going to, everyone was saying like the games mattered more when if you lost one, you'd be screwed. Like, the fact that every game that every single team basically ranked like, basically ranked in the top 25 other than Vandy and Louisville are going to play has like real playoff implications, or could have real playoff implications. I think that rocks.
The losses matter less, but the wins matter more, which I think is a cooler spot to exist in. And I didn't really think about what that would mean.
Yeah.
Or at least the first loss matters less. Yeah.
I mean, to it, kinda,
well, for us,
like,
for us,
how many teams are going to end up ending the season with only one loss?
Like maybe two.
Yeah,
Indiana and SMU.
last year, Washington, Georgia, Florida State were the only teams in the country to end their seasons with only one loss. So, like, one loss used to be a death knell. One loss kind of still is a major problem that you have to overcome, and your margin for error now completely goes away. But I like the fact that, I hate that it came at Penn State's expense, but I like that a team like Ohio State could go into aughts and get into a slugfest with Oregon, lose that game, and still have hope for what they could accomplish this season. Like, I think that's a very good thing. And I like a team like Penn State could play host to a top 3 team in the country, lose to them in a game that was decided on the margins, and still have real, even if they weren't at my team, still have real hope of doing something once this playoff rolls around. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for now,
can I share my
thank you,
playoff
everyone,
field? Because I typed it out and I just want to hear your thoughts on it. I know we're at an hour, but if we don't want to hear it, I don't have to share it.
Why not?
Number 1, Oregon. Number 2, this is how I typed this out on Saturday night to my friends. 1, Oregon. 2, Miami. 3, Georgia. 4, BYU, I guess. 5, Ohio State. 6, Tennessee. 7, PSU. 8 Indiana, 9 Notre Dame, 10 SMU, 11, oh God, this is going to be Brian Kelly, isn't it? 12 Boise. And that is how I wrote it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate. You had what? SMU in there. You had Boise State in there, and you had Notre Dame in there. So 3 like small time schools getting an opportunity would be really cool.
Notre Dame,
thank you,
Notre Dame's
everyone,
second best team in Indiana.
Yeah. I'm boy, am I interested in what happens once Indiana plays teams that they aren't able to just like run past. But we'll save that for another time. Thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. As always, make sure you're subscribing wherever you go and get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts, whether that's Spotify, wherever it might be. If you could leave us a 5-star review, please go and leave us a 5-star review. Please head over to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hop into the YouTube comments, talk about Penn State football with whomever shows up over there. On Twitter at RLRblog, make sure you're giving us a follow over there. And of course, we want to give a shout out to Home Field Apparel one last time. Please use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
For all of our listeners under 40, be ready to help your parents sign up for Peacock.